Hello everyone. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share new Wendigo horror stories. First story, Wendigo. My grandfather told me this story when I was younger. As far as I know, this is the legend his Cheyenne mom told him. This is really the only story he told me that was scary that I can remember. The Wendigo is like the wind. You cannot see it, but you can feel it, even deep in your bones. It can see as well as the eagle, perhaps even better than the eagle. And child, it does not judge. Man, child, woman, good, bad, it will strike. It does not see skin color. Even the white man can fall victim. I hope you never see a man taken by it. It is a frightful sight. When I was a small child, near your own age, I saw a man go crazy. He claims he heard his name, "Oh the wind," and he hid in his home, yelling at the voice to leave. He, who was of a gentle spirit, would yell at anyone who came near. He would curse, kick, cry, and the longer he tried to keep from the voice, the worse it became. The last day he was crying, then rushed out of the home. By this time the wind raged all around our homes, threatening to tear them and us apart. He yelled he was hot, that he was on fire. He ran out of the village, faster than a deer, and then even faster. A few men, my father included, ran after him, following his tracks. When they disappeared, they came back home. The tracks had become longer and longer, as if he was being dragged away. They said they could hear him calling, yelling about the fire, begging to be let go, to be free. And you see, he was dragged. We never could find his body, although a hunter said he had found ashes, not too far from where he last stood. An elder said it was the Wendigo, but he would speak no more of it. And I shall speak of it no more, save for this advice. Child, if you ever hear the wind calling you, run. Do not listen. Run and never stop. It will follow you, and if you stop it will grab you and drag you into the sky. Don't ever stop. Second story. Forest encounter left me scared shitless. Okay, this is something I experienced a few years back. During the summer break, my sister and I were visiting our aunt who lived in the country. Her house is located in a fairly wooded area, but there are several neighbors around. There's a man-made lake about a mile away from my aunt's place, and it is pretty much surrounded by woods. Me and my sister loved to walk around near the lake whenever we visited our aunt, ever since we were small kids. So this time too, we decided to go for a walk. It was about 5 p.m., and the sun was shining brightly. We were told not to walk alone near the lake, because there could be wild animals or poachers and whatnot, but we decided that we were old enough to go alone, 15 and 13 years old. So we sneaked out while the adults were chatting in the living room and strolled along the path to the lake. The air is fresh, the sun is bright, and we're feeling like we could take over the world. We were walking along the wooded path to the lake when my phone rang. It was my mom, who was at the aunt's. Because we sneaked out without telling them and we were almost at the lake, I didn't answer it and put the phone into silent mode. Stupid. Yeah, I know. Then we reached the lake, take our shoes and socks off, and dip our feet into the cool water. We talked for some time. Regular teen stuff. I was telling a joke to my sister when this horrible feeling washed over me. It was like I was being watched. I instantly whipped my head around because I thought there was a perv or someone stalking us, but there was no one around. My sister, too, seemed to be spooked by something. She asked me, "Did you feel that?" And I said yes. We sat there for a few minutes, holding each other's hands and hearts in our throats, but nothing happened. The feeling eventually went away, so we brushed it off. After some time, we got bored and decided to search for something to eat. The woods around the lake were practically full of wild berries, so we decided to go pick some. I found a nice patch of berries not far from the tree line and we quickly started picking them up and shoved them into our mouths. I had finished half of the berries I had picked when I noticed a really cool bug on a leaf. I wanted to snap a photo of it because I hadn't seen it anywhere else. I searched my pockets for the phone, and it wasn't there. My sister asked what was wrong, and soon we both started crawling around searching for the phone. It was a fairly new one and quite expensive, so I absolutely did not want to lose it. "Don't freak out, sis," my sister said. "Let's just give it a ring. If it's nearby, we'd hear it." She took her phone out and called my number. Instantly, my ringing tone starts going off to the left of us. It was near the path we took into the forest and was pretty loud. So I take a step to go and retrieve it, but grabs me by the wrist and stops me. "You turned the silent mode on, didn't you?" she asks with a shaking voice. That's when it dawns upon me. I was 100% sure I turned it on. If the phone is silent, then what the fuck is making the ringing tone? Then we realize that the entire forest is silent other than my ringing tone. Dead fucking silent. M's grip on my wrist tightens. We look at each other with sheer terror in our eyes. Suddenly, the ringing stops. Silence. We waited for another 10 seconds. That's when we heard it. My aunt called out to us from somewhere deep in the woods. "M.T. I'm here." We froze. It sounded like our aunt, but my gut told me that it wasn't. Something was off about it. Like the usual emotions were absent. It was almost mechanical, like someone mimicking something he had heard before. Then the voice called out again. This time, it was definitely wrong. It was closer to an animal trying to speak. I screamed at him, "Run." So we ran. Ran like all hell was loose and fucking demons were driving us out of the woods. During the time we ran, I could hear something following us, hot on our heels. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, and occasional screeching noises. Almost like a wild cat, but far more sinister. It reeked of evil. We ran past the lake as fast as we could and finally reached the paved road where several vehicles were parked. The woods also ended there. We were out of breath and scared to the core. I turned around to look. There was nothing. Several people gave us concerned looks, but no one asked anything. We walked with a group of folks who were heading in the direction we needed to go. We kept looking around, but the usual sounds were there, like birds singing. When we got home, we were immediately grounded. We were not allowed to go for walks for the rest of the time we stayed there, even with an adult. We didn't protest. Sometime later, I described this encounter to my aunt. She looked at me, her face as white as a sheet of paper, but she didn't say anything. I tried to press her for information, but every time she shook her head and refused to talk about it. Later, I heard their town had a lot of disappearances after our experience, especially kids and homeless people. I don't know if these things are related, but something tells me they are. Both my sister and I get shivers when we talk about it, considering how close we were to getting abducted, or even killed. I now know about crawlers/rakes, and I believe that's what we met. Third story. I used to be a park ranger, and even I don't believe the horror I found in the woods. I'm posting this as a warning. There are things out there that you don't want to know about. Stay away from them. Don't go looking for them. I'll tell you my story in hopes that it will quench your curiosity. It was a night like any other night, at least lately. Out here in the West Virginia Wildlife Preserve, people tend to think that just because they plant some houses that the animals should somehow know and respect boundaries. That's kind of tough when the animals are on a huge plot of land where they've never been hunted and never even been threatened by anything other than a bigger animal. Folks seem to think this is a great vacation spot for them. What they don't realize is it's also a great vacation spot for the animals. I hopped in the company truck and started toward my first destination of the night. An elderly couple had been terrorized by a deer that literally broke in through a sliding glass door. They managed to trap it in a side room and needed someone to go release it. I got elected. When I got there, the vacationers looked like the ones caught in headlights. They were still wide-eyed. I could tell they were in shock. I had them go into another room and close the door. Once they were out of the way, I found the closest door to the outside and opened it. Then I went to the room with the deer in it. I slowly opened the door and was shocked to find the room covered in blood. The deer was laying on the floor panting. I approached it slowly, circling around to leave the doorway open, hoping to give it an escape route. The closer I got, the more I realized this deer wasn't going anywhere. Its side was covered with claw marks. At first I thought a coyote had attacked it, but the marks were too far apart. They were large enough to be caused by a bear, but the individual claws were too far apart. I'd never seen anything like this. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say Freddy Krueger sliced it up. The deer's eyes went wide when I approached it, but it didn't jump up and run. I took this as a bad sign. Its breath came in ragged gasps as I struggled to roll it over. Once I did, it was my turn to struggle breathing. Its entire side was torn to shreds, but that wasn't the worst part. There were large chunks that were missing. I examined the wounds and found bite marks where the missing flesh should have been. But the bites were massive. If it wouldn't have challenged the laws of nature as well as my own sanity, I would have said it was bitten by a shark. Blood poured out of the side, and the deer struggled to draw breath. I stood and left the room, leaving the poor creature the dignity of a private death. When I went back in, it was still. I took pictures with my cell phone and tried my best to carry the creature out without making more of a mess. After I got it loaded on the back of my truck, I went back inside and talked to the vacationers. When I opened the door to the room they were in, the woman's eyes grew wide and she started screaming. The man's eyes were the size of saucers as well. I approached them slowly with my arms outstretched to try to calm them down. It seemed to have the opposite effect. They started climbing the furniture and clawing at the walls to get away from me. I decided to back away and give them some room. "What's wrong?" I said. The man pointed a shaky finger at me. "Yo, you're covered in blood," he said. "The deer got you," the woman said. "You've got rabies." "Or worse," the man said, keeping his distance. "I'm sorry, folks," I said. "This is the deer's blood. You killed it just for breaking in?" The woman said. "What? No, it was already injured. I just took it to my truck." The couple seemed to settle down and consider this. "So you don't have rabies?" The man said slowly, looking me up and down. "Or anything else?" "No, ma'am. I'm fine." She took her turn eyeing me up and down. I assumed looking for wounds. Being satisfied, they asked the one question I didn't want to answer. "So what killed the deer?" The man said. "I really don't know," I said truthfully. Having just gotten them calmed down, I didn't want to send them back into a panic. "It was probably just a coyote," I said. "A coyote?" the man said, diving back into the pool of panic. "Or a bear?" I said, trying and failing to calm them. "A bear," the woman said, diving in after her husband. "You know, folks, you've had a traumatic night," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, I'd—" "We're leaving," the woman said, dragging her husband out of the room. "That sounds like a good idea," I said. And then, like an idiot, I added, "I hope you enjoyed your stay." They either didn't hear me or ignored me. Either way, it wasn't long until I heard a car start, then roar away from the house. I went back into the room where the deer had been trapped and started working backwards from there, trying to find out what had happened. It wasn't hard to pick up the trail. It had been bleeding badly. Seeing the bites and claw marks made that fairly obvious. I tracked back through the kitchen and out the smashed glass door. Once outside, I turned on my flashlight. The trail was a little harder to follow, but not much. I could still see drops of blood beside its tracks as I followed them back toward the pond behind the house. I approached the pond and saw signs of a struggle. This must have been where the deer was attacked. There were other tracks in with the deers, but they didn't make sense to me. They were large, too large. Their shape was odd as well. If I had to call them anything, I would have called them duck prints. But massive, larger than any duck by many times. A giant duck with shark teeth. I think I'll leave that out of my report. I thought. It suddenly struck me what the tracks were. It was a man with swim fins on his feet. But why? Why go to all that trouble to poach a deer when you can just knock it out with a tranquilizer gun? My mind sent me an answer, but I didn't like it. What if the man is a psychopath? Just getting his kicks by killing an animal with his bare hands? I thought about the mental hospital in the neighboring county and wondered if one of their patients had taken an unsanctioned leave of absence and they were trying to keep it quiet. I didn't like that thought one bit. Aside from the fact that it didn't explain the huge bites on the deer, it also meant we had someone who might suddenly get a taste for killing. Doing this to animals was horrible, but what if he decided to go after something bigger? I shot a look at the house, wondering how many vacationers were within a short walk from this spot and how many were armed. As I contemplated the safety of the people in the area, I heard something behind me. I whipped around and shone my light, but saw nothing. I scanned the pond and saw a ripple emanating from the middle. Probably just a fish jumping. I took some more pictures of the struggle area with my phone, then started back toward my truck. I had more calls to answer, and this riddle would have to wait. I drove halfway around the lake, around 3 miles, to the other vacation home where a break-in had been reported. When the woman in her 30s answered the door, she took a step back. "Oh my," she said, looking at the dried blood all over my uniform. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry about my appearance," I said. "Did you report a break-in?" "Yes, we did. Please come in," she said in a friendly tone, yet gave me a wide berth while closing the door. She led me upstairs to the kitchen. For some reason, I was expecting to find blood all over like with the last house. However, this was a completely different mess. She showed me the door. It had been forced open, but not shattered like the last one. There was only a small amount of glass broken. Then the door latch had been unlocked and the door slid open. There were faint images of my giant duck tracks like the last house. My spine turned to ice. This house was over 3 miles away from the other. There were many more people in that space that might have fallen victim to this crazed person. The woman showed me the rest of the kitchen and the mess that had been left. There were a few cans of sardines that had been opened and eaten, and also some cans of tuna fish. The strange thing was how they were opened. The cans had been torn into with something sharp, but not a can opener. The marks looked like they were torn open with claws. I shuddered to imagine the amount of strength it took to do something like that. And then I spotted it. Beside one of the cans of tuna was a small puddle of blood. "Ma'am, could I trouble you for a sandwich bag?" I said. She handed me one, and I carefully tried to scrape as much blood into it as possible. I sealed it and put it in my pocket, then went out through the broken door. Behind the house, just like with most of these vacation houses, there was a pond. I traced the tracks back to it, and they disappeared at the water line. I shone my light over the water, but the only thing I saw was a stray turtle. I stared at it for a long time, as though it would somehow give me a clue as to what was going on. "What should we do?" the woman said, nearly scaring me half to death. I hadn't heard her follow me out the door and into the yard. "I'll send someone around to look at that door in the morning," I said. "In the meantime, it might not be a bad idea to sleep in a room that has a lock on the door. I'm sure they won't be back, but just in case." She didn't seem very comforted by that idea, but thanked me as I left. The next two reports were just teenagers breaking in and stealing beer. That was it. No bloody wildlife, no weird tracks, just kids being kids. I went back to the station, changed out of my bloody uniform, and spent the rest of the night filling out reports on what had happened. When my shift was over and I passed on what had happened, I took a little trip to the neighboring county. I stopped in at the mental hospital and asked if they had any escapes lately. The nurse looked at me like I had asked her if she was wearing deodorant. "We don't have escapes," she said with obvious pride that showed as arrogance. I thanked her and left, feeling less than satisfied with her answer. Next, I stopped in at the local police department and asked one of my friends on the force if they could analyze the blood sample for me. I shared my thoughts that there might be an escapee from the mental hospital and the blood sample might help us find out who and track him down. It was well past noon until I got to bed. That night when I got to work, it was pandemonium. There had been more break-ins, and people were starting to panic. The owner of the resort was frantic. People were canceling left and right and wanting their money back. When I walked in, he stormed his pudgy face right up into mine. "You told people to go home?" he fumed, glaring up at me. "I merely suggested. Do you want to pay their rental out of your salary?" "I work for the state, not you," I said. He turned a deeper shade of red. "Would you rather see people in body bags instead of animals?" I said. "That wouldn't do much for business, now would it?" He turned fire engine red and stormed out, mumbling, "We'll see." I investigated 5 break-ins that night. Only 2 of them were legit. The rest seemed like half-hearted attempts to stage a break-in so they could get out of paying for their rental. The 2 real ones shared the same characteristics as before, just enough of a broken window to open the door. The cans of whatever seafood was available. They even got shrimp out of the freezer. Everything about the way the intruder acted pointed to a person. All I needed to know was who. Again, I followed the tracks back to the nearby pond. I stood for a long time studying the surface of the water. I knew these ponds were all designed the same. A roughly 40-yard by 40-yard body of water around 5 feet deep in the middle, stocked with mostly bluegill for catch and release fishing. Anyone using these ponds to hide would have to be holding their breath for inhuman periods of time. I stared at the surface for 20 minutes. If someone was out there, they had an invisible snorkel or an extra set of lungs. After my rounds of investigating and reporting, I decided to stick around and do a little extra investigating. I ran home, grabbed my swim trunks, mask, and snorkel, and went to the site of the most recent break-in. I waded out into the water, unsure of what I would find when a snake slithered past me. I let it go and waded deep enough to where I could swim. I hovered at the level of the surface, dipping my mask underwater to get a glimpse of whatever there was to see. There wasn't much. Fish, underwater plants, and lots of water. Just what you would expect from a pond. As I kept going towards the middle, the water was getting deeper. I now couldn't touch the bottom. I had to float on the surface. Looming in front of me was a dark spot on the bottom of the pond. I took it for a rock, but swam close enough to investigate anyway. In for a penny, in for a pound. As I drew close enough to hover over it, I realized it wasn't a rock. I took a deep breath and dove to find out what it was. The further I swam down, the further I was able to swim down. I kept going and going. Light disappeared. I was sure I had been swimming straight down for a solid minute without touching the bottom. I turned and looked up. The surface of the pond was only a pinprick of light. My lungs screamed at me to turn around. I had no choice but to comply. I clawed at the water in desperation. It seemed like I was swimming in mud, or something was pulling me down, almost like a force or current pushing against me. wanting me to drown before I could fully explore this hidden secret. After what felt like an eternity, I broke the surface of the water and gasped for air. I swam over to the shallows and walked out of the pond. I collapsed on the shore and lay there for a long time trying to regain my breath. As my brain received oxygen, I thought about what had happened and if it had been real, an illusion, or if I had just gotten turned around somehow and stuck at the bottom. I had to find out. I wasted no time driving 2 counties over and renting some dive equipment, along with a light. So armed, I returned to the pond and walked toward the middle again. This time when I dove toward the dark spot, I was able to see exactly what it was. I used the flashlight to examine the darkness. As I swam deeper, the sides closed in on me as if I was swimming down the gullet of some massive fish. I've never been claustrophobic before, but that was rapidly changing. I barely had any room to maneuver as the sides closed in. I contemplated turning around, but there was no room. I could feel myself start to panic. I had to focus to keep my breaths regular. I was very close to a panic attack when suddenly the tunnel opened up again. The sides grew further apart. I checked my watch, and I had been under for 15 minutes. The sides of the tunnel had spread out so far they were barely visible, and I could see a light ahead of me. I swam toward it, desperate to get out of this water. I broke through the surface and looked around. I was in the pond. Somehow I had gotten turned around and was back in the pond. I swam to the side until I could stand and walked out to the shore. Looking around, I made a startling discovery. I was in a pond, the same one as the break-in last night. Somehow there was a hidden tunnel between the 2 ponds. That's how the robber never gets caught. He just swims to the next pond slick as snot.
No fas, no más punto.
I now knew the how, but I needed to know more. As tempting as it was to swim back through the tunnel, I was still a little shaken and didn't want to risk an underwater panic attack. I walked back to my truck, took off my dive equipment, and drove back to the dive shop. I asked about frequent customers, especially for refilling tanks. They told me they had a few regulars that came in every weekend, but no one new and no one who needed refilled more than once a week. I asked if there were any other dive shops in the area, and they told me the next closest one was over 100 miles away. I went home frustrated. It wasn't making sense. He would need air to swim back and forth through that tunnel, and that was his escape route. I was sure of it. I tried to sleep through the afternoon, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. It was working on the impossible puzzle of how the robber was getting air. I borrowed a couple trail cams and set one up at each pond. I needed to see if he had some new tank system or what. I also wanted to identify him and shut him down fast. I made sure to stay away from those ponds that night so he would feel free to do his thing. In the morning, I gathered the cameras and took them home. I downloaded both memory cards before watching the video. Just as the second download was finished, my phone rang. "Hello?" I said. "Hey, John, it's Steve. I got the results from that blood you gave me the other day." "Great," I said, hitting the play button on my computer. "Were you able to get a match on any hospital records?" "Not exactly." "Why not?" I asked as a ghostly green image appeared on my computer. The image was blurred, but it was definitely the size of a man walking upright toward the camera. I clicked to the next slide and froze at what I saw. "Well, the thing is, the blood you gave me came back as reptile DNA. I registered the words he said in my mind, just like I registered the image on my computer screen, but I just couldn't place them in reality." "Are you there?" he said into the phone. "Yes, I'm sorry," I said. "Could you send a copy of your findings to my office?" "Sure, no problem." "Thanks, I appreciate it. You really helped me figure this out." "Anytime," he said cheerfully before hanging up. I hadn't taken my eyes off the computer screen the whole time. No matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't make my mind acknowledge it as real. Standing there, large as life, was not a man in a wet suit. It was a creature. I could see the wide mouth full of sharp teeth that looked exactly like the bites on the deer. I could see the webbed feet that looked like swim fins, only they had claws sticking out of the front where toes would be. I saw the razor-sharp claws on its webbed hands. It was a full-on nightmare staring me in the face. I sat back and thought for a long time. Then I printed copies of the images and put them in an envelope. I rushed to the station to share the information I had with my fellow rangers. As I was showing them, their faces ranged in emotions from shock to disbelief to outright mocking. As I was going through my investigation, the owner of the timeshares walked in. "What are we all looking at?" he said, eyeing me with contempt. "It seems like John has solved the case of the break-ins," one of the other rangers said. The owner approached. He picked up the lab report and read it, then stared for a long time at the picture. "Do you know what this is?" he said absently. "I really don't know yet," I said. "I've never seen anything like it." He turned to me and smiled. "This is money," he said, holding up the picture. "What do you mean?" I said, "Those idiots that go around hunting, what do they call them?" "Cryptids." "Yeah, cryptids. They'll pay through the nose if they think they can find something like this. And then there's the TV shows and merchandising," he said. "You may have saved my financial hide." He beamed at me. "I don't think you understand," I said. "This is a dangerous animal. If you had seen what it did to that deer. So what do you want to do? Hunt it down and kill it? Maybe not kill it, but definitely tranquilize it and take it to a secure location where it can't hurt anyone." "You dumb son of a bitch," he yelled. "I could make a mint. I wouldn't even have to repair those houses. They would all rush in to investigate and leave piles of cash in my bank account. But what about the people?" "Who cares about the people?" he said. "Throw them all out. I've got the chance of a lifetime beating down my front door, and you want to flush it down the toilet because you're scared someone might break a nail." He was breathing hard and staring up into my face. The air was charged with fury, his and mine, and then a sudden calm came over him. "Charles," he said, addressing the lead ranger, "isn't this a wildlife preserve?" "Yes, it is," Charles said warily. "And aren't the wildlife on this preserve protected from all tampering by law?" "Well, I guess so," Charles said. "What if those animals present a threat?" I said to Charles, "How many deer were killed by coyotes on this preserve last year?" The owner said. "Dozens," Charles said. "Were the coyotes removed from the preserve?" "No," Charles said. The owner turned and shot me a triumphant look. "John," Charles said, "I know you have everyone's best interests in mind, but you're gonna have to let this go." I glared at him. "And what happens when this thing decides it likes to eat humans?" All the eyes in the room that had been on me suddenly found somewhere else to look. All but the owner. He was smiling from ear to ear. I think the pudgy little bastard was about to break into the happy dance. I searched the room for any support but found none. I pulled my badge off my shirt, quietly laid it on the desk, and left. If that was the end of my story, I would say I had failed. I took my pension and rented one of the houses on the preserve. The owner had leaked through social media that a cryptid had been spotted on the preserve. As he had guessed, the cryptid hunters and TV crews came in droves, renting everything in sight. My goal was different. I already knew it existed. I knew how it got around without being detected. I stayed at one of the break-in houses. Every night I took a huge tuna I had bought fresh that morning and laid it out beside the pond. I sat in the dark living room and watched the first night as it approached the fish with more caution than curiosity. After sniffing it for a long time, it grabbed it and dove for the pond. Each night after, I laid out a fish and the creature became less cautious. It was being fed, and the media frenzy was starving. The hunters had found nothing. There were no sightings as long as I fed it. Everyone had their cameras set up. The few that roamed around left me alone when they saw someone in the house. I guess they thought I was another cryptid hunter and respected my privacy. As the number of sightings stayed at 0, they started turning on the owner, calling him a fraud. His reputation plummeted. After a week with no sightings, people started leaving. In desperation, he did the wrong thing. He hired an actor to dress in a creature suit and roam around. Of course, the hunters and shows saw right through this and destroyed what was left of his reputation. I had rented the house for 2 weeks. Between the rent and the fish, my money was running out. I had kept the people safe, but what would happen when I stopped feeding it? I had managed to clear out most of the people so they would be safe, but what about my fellow rangers? What would happen when it became desperate? When the starving creature no longer had houses full of food to break into? I had 3 more nights until I had to leave. I was out of money. The preserve had become a ghost town. As far as I knew, I was the only renter left. It was decision time. I sat staring at the large tuna on the table with a bottle of bleach next to it. Let it live and see what happens, or kill it? I thought about this for a long time. Both options had merits and consequences. I chose a third option, a much more dangerous one. I took the fish out and laid it where I usually did, then backed up a few feet and stood there. Over an hour passed before the water stirred. I saw the head and eyes of the creature appear as it headed toward the fish. And then it stopped. It had seen me. I made sure to keep still with my arms at my side. It slowly approached and stood. It was a few feet away with the fish in between us. It studied me and sniffed the air, then became agitated. Perhaps it had smelled my scent before as a pursuer. It let out a soft hiss but bent down and took the fish, keeping its eyes on me the entire time. Then once it had its meal, it did the most incredible physical display I've ever seen. It leaped 20 feet in the air and landed in a perfect dive right in the middle of the pond, leaving almost no splash. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and collapsed to the ground, shaking. Once I had recovered, I went back inside and fell into a fitful sleep. That was only part of my plan. The next night would decide who lived and who died. I did exactly like the night before, minus the fish. The creature approached, stepped up to me, and looked around for the fish. I showed it my empty hands. It sniffed at them and growled, having smelled the scent of fish. It looked at my hands, and I wondered if it was going to bite them off as a substitute. It hissed at me and sniffed my face. I saw it flexing its claws the whole time. I stared into its face, those massive razor-sharp teeth, and swallowed hard. I did all I could to stay still, to show it I wasn't a threat. My heart hammered in my chest. It opened its jaws and showed me those horrible teeth. Its breath was a horrid stench I had never smelled and hoped to never again. I closed my eyes, not knowing if they would ever open. Seconds fell into minutes. I opened my eyes and I was alone. There wasn't even a ripple in the water. I sighed. My decision had been made. It had shown restraint, and I would too. I went back inside, packed, and left. I could only hope and pray that the people that remained, including my former co-workers, would be safe. I went home and slept restlessly. In the morning, there was a report in the newspaper on a break-in at the wildlife preserve. They said the only thing that was taken were cans of tuna fish. I smiled ruefully and wondered how long it would stay that way. If you're reading this, don't go looking for this thing. If you see it, don't tell others about it. Just leave it alone and hope for the best. Fourth story. Something followed me home from the woods. The house I lived in with my dad, stepmom, and stepsister when I was in high school was super haunted. My dad and stepmom recently sold the house. God willing, I'll never have to go back. So I figured it was safe enough to tell some of the stories from my time there. This story is from just a week or two after we moved in. Our house sat on a pretty steep incline. In the back there was room for a concrete patio and a little space for a vegetable garden. Past that, the ground sloped steeply up into very thick woods that were full of oak, birch, and pine trees. The woods were pretty wild, but there was an obvious path that led straight off from our property into the thicket. It ignited my stepsister's curiosity as soon as she saw it. She was a few years younger than me. I think she was about 12 when we moved in, and I would have been 14 or 15. Rita, my stepsister, was on me from the second we moved in to go into the woods with her. I used to go hiking with my dad before he started dating my stepmom, so to her that made me an expert on nature. But the thickness of the underbrush in the woods behind the house really put me off. Eventually, I gave in to Rita's constant wheedling and agreed to explore the woods behind the house. I talked Rita into putting on long pants to protect from brambles, and we set out into the woods. The incline was really steep and only got steeper the further we went in. The weeds and brambles along the forest floor were thick and cloying, clinging to our pants' legs and pricking at our skin even through our jeans. The path we were following was narrow and roamed left to right, seeking the easiest way past trees and bushes. It was probably a path used by deer and foxes, and we struggled to follow it. I remember Rita saying, "This is so cool. It's a for-real forest right behind our house," and trying not to scoff where she could hear or see it. I already felt like I was too old to play around in the woods. Those thoughts aside, I thought it was unwelcoming and king of creepy. Definitely not the kind of place I would have wanted to play even when I was her age. It was quiet in the woods. As we stepped deeper and higher, the incline just kept going up and up. We didn't hear any bird sounds, insects. It seemed like the only sound was what our feet made as they pushed through the underbrush and what the wind made as it blew hot, sticky summer air against our backs. After a few minutes of hard going, the incline started to even out and soon we were walking downward, the forest floor now sloping away down into a valley. "Have you ever been out in the woods like this before?" Rita asked, holding onto the back of my shirt as she cautiously descended down deeper into the woods. She was stepping carefully in my footsteps as she picked her way down. "Not like this," I told her, holding onto a crooked tree as I held a hand out to help her over a fallen log. "We went to public parks mostly. They maintain their forests so they aren't congested like this. Isn't it exciting to have this as our backyard?" she asked with a smile, her hands small and strong in mine as she hauled herself over the tree. "Yeah, it is pretty nice," I agreed, even though I privately thought that the woods were too wild to be much fun to walk in. We had only been hiking for maybe 15 minutes, and I was already starting to breath faster due to the harsh incline. We went a little farther and heard the sound of running water. It was the first sound other than the wind that we had heard since entering the woods. "A stream,"
Rita exclaimed.
"Do you think it's at the bottom of the valley?" she asked, excited. "Yeah, probably," I grunted. "But don't rush. You don't want to fall and get hurt in here." I kept a hand out to help her along all the same. The image of her with a twisted ankle or broken leg filled me with anxiety, and I tried to keep a hand on her as she hurried ahead of me. The stream was at the bottom of the valley, a small but fast-moving creek that was perfectly clear. The bottom was covered in a fine silt and tiny rounded stones. Looking close, we saw that there were little minnows swimming at the edges where the current wasn't as fast. We both took off our shoes and socks, rolled up our pant legs, and waded into the water. In the center, it came up to our calves, and the current was swift. The water was blessedly cool and felt great against my feet. Rita was delighted, picking up stones to put in her pockets and watching the little fish swim around her feet and brush against her toes. For the first time since we started to push through the woods, I was happy that Rita had suggested it. This was a great find and was worth the hard work to get to it. Then, seemingly out of the blue, I was struck with this strong feeling that I was being watched. It was bright even that deep in the woods. The air was hot and the wind through the trees was humid. Even so, I got a cold chill that ran down my back, and suddenly my throat and stomach were in knots. There was some part of my brain, like this primal hindbrain, that pricked up and said, "Holy fuck, you are in danger." I froze, barely daring to breathe, and looked around as much as I could without moving my head, and I saw it. I'm still not really sure what it was. It was standing further down the stream, which steadily moved lower between the hills. It was standing up straight and perfectly still in the center of the stream, watching us. Small trees and shrubs grew all along the creek and leaned into the space above it to stretch for sunlight. This made it hard to see the person or figure through them. Their face was obscured by branches and leaves, but I could make out a little of their body, and everything about it made me feel something was wrong down to the marrow in my bones. They were in a human shape, standing up, arms at their sides, their legs straight, knees locked. The water was visibly burbling around their shins, so they were displacing the water. But they were completely black. Not like matte black, like they were painted black or wearing black clothing. Like a complete absence of light and color, as if their shape was punched out of the air around them. I grabbed Rita's arm as she danced past me, probably too hard for someone so much smaller than me. I remember in the corner of my eye I saw her turn to me with a narrow look, like she thought she was going to fight me. Then, she looked where I was looking and saw it. I was able to watch out of the corner of her eye as her body went through the same things mine had. She froze, her eyes went wide, her breathing shallow. Then, I felt her muscles tense and her knees bend. I realized we were like deer who had just spotted a predator. Some part of us realized we were prey, and that the next few seconds would decide if we got out of this or not. With a single shove, I pushed us both into movement. Rita took off up the embankment into the woods with a kind of grace and brutality I didn't realize she was capable of. Without her shoes, she leapt from rock to root to fallen tree like it was something she had done every day for years. Being bigger and bulkier than her, I didn't feel nearly as graceful, but I felt that my panic and the adrenaline pounding between my ears made up for it. I kept up with her, pushing her with a hand between her shoulder blades or at the seat of her, but whenever I caught up, behind us, there was the horrible silence. We were a cacophony of crashing noises ripping through the woods and all around us. No birds sang, no insects chirped, not even the wind whistled through the trees. That whole run back through the woods was a blur. I never once looked back for fear of what I would see, and I didn't see Rita look back either. I kept my eyes glued to her back, carefully watched her every footfall in constant fear that she would slip or fall, but she never did. Once we crashed back through the edge of the woods and into our yard, it was like the sound was suddenly turned back on. Not that Rita or I cared. We continued running as fast as our bodies would take us for the house, and once inside we slammed the back door shut and I slid the deadlock home. I pressed my back against the door with my breath heaving for a moment before running to the front door and locking it as well. Then I went window to window on the first floor, making sure they were all locked and that the curtains were pulled. Only once that was done did I collapse onto the living room floor with Rita. "We left our shoes and socks by the creek," she wheezed, sticking her muddy feet into the air where I could see them. "Who fucking cares?" I gasped back. "I'll tell Dad I lost them," I added. That was really the start of it all. After it happened, For a while, Rita and I assumed we had left whatever it was down in the creek. We knew our parents wouldn't believe us, so we never brought it up to them. But we didn't leave it behind. It followed us home, and it made the next few years in that house utter hell. I have a lot more stories to tell about what happened after that. I'll work on typing up the rest in the next few days. Fifth story. Something absolutely malevolent exists in rural Montana. The jump scares, the monster under the bed, your friend dressed up as a man with a knife. These are all pretty damn scary. But I consider these temporary and/or mild scares, scares that aren't slow. Oftentimes, it's a harmless scene from a movie or a friend pulling a prank on you that elicits a 5-second shriek. True fear, a pervasive fear that slowly eats away at your conscience, comes out of the unknown. The feeling that deep in the depths of darkness, something is going to take you away, that something is lurking in the shadows. It's the feeling that any second, you could be dead, the feeling that a pair of beady eyes are staring right at you, but you can't stare back. My journey began in Montana. It was a November night in 2004, and I was en route to Calgary, Canada. My family comes from Canada, and I was making the drive from my home in Billings to Calgary. The main highways were shutting down in preparation for a snowstorm, and few dared to drive out in the impending snowstorm. Me, I was a cocky 20-year-old who didn't give a damn. I figured, I was born in Canada. I drive AF 150. I can handle some snowy roads. Rural Montana is eerie at night, especially the back roads. The main route from Kalispell to Lethbridge, Canada, was closed, and I was forced to take a back route, a seemingly endless 2-lane road that probably hadn't been worked on in decades. I remember turning my turn signal on and heading north on that road. It was about 11 p.m., and the snow showers were beginning to turn into a windy, snowy mess, with my windshield wipers just barely clearing off the falling snow. I wasn't worried about the weather, nor the ice coating the 2-laned road, nor the health of my mother. No, I was preoccupied with the feeling that something was behind me. See, the road was entirely straight and cut through a dense pine forest. The road was devoid of any curves, turns, or signs. It was merely a 50-mile-long straight shot through a dense forest. Straight, endless. My brights only exposed the sheer desolation, the isolation of the environment in which I was in. I hadn't seen an automobile in half an hour. I felt exposed yet utterly alone at the same time. To calm my nerves, I inserted a Toby Keith CD into my radio and cranked the volume up. The soothing sound of country guitar was beginning to relax me. It was alleviating the feeling of unease. About a minute into the song, the track became jumbled. The guitar solo was abruptly interrupted by scratchy sounds. It was akin to nail on a chalkboard. It was absolutely unbearable. As I adjusted the volume, my F-150 lost traction on the ice, and within seconds, I found my car coming to a screeching halt, my hood trapped in a large snow bank approximately 20 feet off the side of the road. Fuck! I screamed. I turned on my hazards and proceeded to curse like a sailor as I stepped out of the car and into the snowy landscape. The blizzard hindered the visibility to the point where I could hardly see feet in front of me. A ferocious icy wind was burning my face, and the feeling of unease only grew. I threw on an extra parka and turned my car off. That's when I heard his voice. "Adam," he said.
Adam.
It was a voice that absolutely sent shivers up my spine. A voice that caused me to tense up like a marble statue. It was the voice of my father. "Adam, is that you?" I gulped and could barely breathe. My father was a park ranger in Banff, and then at Glacier National Park when we moved to America. When I was 10 years old, he got lost in a snowstorm, and was never heard from again. His body was never found, and while the police searched for weeks, he was eventually declared dead. I didn't have time to draw parallels between my situation and his situation, and I let emotion overtake me. Dad, I continued, Dad, I can't see you. I can see you just fine, it said. Come a little closer. I froze. The seconds of emotions and adrenaline had abruptly come to a halt. I'm a rational man. My father was dead. He had been dead for 10 years. Something else was going on. Adam, did I stutter? Come with me, it said. Come with me. It's nice and warm where I stand. Come with me. I still couldn't see whatever the fuck was speaking, and I had no time to play games. I hopped in my car and started the ignition. The damn thing wouldn't start. Adam, your car won't start. It's futile, it said. The voice was distorted this time. It sounded as if my father had the flu, a real deep, raspy voice. Despite the freezing cold, I could feel nervous sweat dripping from my brow. The slow scare I mentioned was sinking in. I couldn't think. My hands shook relentlessly as I tried to start the car. Against my better judgment, I stepped out the pickup truck and ran the opposite direction. I had never run faster in my life. The only force keeping my ass from running out of breath was pure fear and adrenaline. Behind me, I heard it calling my name, its voice becoming more distorted each second.
Adam. Adam.
Adam. Within minutes, as the snow relentlessly beat down on me, and as the moon became shrouded by pine trees and snow, I found myself in the middle of a pine forest, lost completely. Its voice, however, was slowly disappearing. As it faded into the night, so did my consciousness. The cold had gotten to me, and I hadn't realized it. Before I drifted to an unconscious sleep, I slowly put two and two together. It's November. My dad. November. Snowstorm. Lost forever. Those were my final thoughts before waking up in a Great Falls hospital. Surrounded by doctors, I glanced around me. I was dizzy and dozed in and out of consciousness before finally waking up. I drew a comparison between what happened to my father when I was 10 and the near death I had avoided. I shivered. After minutes of recuperating, the doctor beside my bed explained what had happened. Mr. Redacted, you are a lucky man. You were found unconscious 200 yards away from a country road. Your body temperature was 88°F. I'm amazed that you seemingly won't suffer any long-term effects. Who found me? I asked, completely dazed, still recalling the thing that had chased me. Some man driving to Missoula saw your Ford deep in the trees off the side of the road, your hazards reflecting some light. Minutes later, he heard groaning and found your motionless body in the snow. The doctor continued, I only have one real question before I let you rest and talk to your mother. What drove you to leave your automobile and run into a pine forest in the middle of a snowstorm? He coughed and chuckled as he said, I mean, come on, what happened? Did you see a ghost? As he laughed at his corny joke, I thought to myself, I wish I had seen it.